Laredo is in the house. Hello, Laredo.
All right, 186-823. Yeah. So can you dial in? You can stay on video, but then dial in through your phone, Dr. Nikki, so we can hear you.
Can you hear us? Dr. Nikki, can you?
Oh, she froze. Okay. Maybe she's logging out. Oh, didn't you have to log out and log back in, Danielle?
She's logging back in.
No, I'm talking about the last time when we tried to do it.
Yeah. Okay, can we hear you now?
I think we can.
Dr. Nikki?
Yes. We can hear you.
I did nothing to freak out.
Oh, so right on time, 3:59 too.
Okay, so what we're gonna do?
I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. We're happy it worked out. I'm gonna go ahead and mute you for now, though.
Okay.
All right. It is 3:59. So what we're going to do is we're going to give everyone about 5 minutes. We had over 300 people RSVP for this. And so we just want to try to get everybody in. And so if you are here on the right side in the chat room, can you put where you're from, what your profession is, and what was the other one? Your name, profession, location, just so we can see who's in here. We did see lots of places all over.
Yes.
So we're happy that you guys made it. But
Austria, Vancouver, California. Oh my goodness.
And I'm going to share, we're going to share our screen so you can see who we have on today. And then we'll come in and introduce ourselves, introduce our guests, and get the conversation going.
All right. 4 p.m. Right on time.
I'm on schedule.
You know I stay on schedule. I'm gonna.
What is that?
I don't want to mute the mic. Hold on.
What is that?
Can y'all try to mute me? Yeah, since y'all are admin. Okay. All right.
Can y'all hear us
Can y'all
now?
hear us now?
Well, I can hear Justin. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Can you,
Everybody-
y'all
okay,
can hear us
awesome.
now?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right. We're going to take all our guests off mute. Elisa is going to give the background of us, the event.
And a welcome.
And a welcome.
To everybody that is here, to all our panelists. Thank you so much for taking time out of your weekend to do this. We are so excited. This is the first time we're doing anything like this, so bear with us. Okay, we're gonna have a good time. But we're just gonna introduce real quick Melanin Mental Health. We are an organization. I am Elisa Bokeen, and you are who?
I'm Ebony Harris.
And we like to tell people that we are two brown chicks changing the face of therapy on both sides of the couch. And we have an amazing team here. We also have Justin Smith. You want to wave?
Oh, yeah. They're going to pop on so y'all can see them. But we have...
Yes, our team, which consists of Justin Smith, who is our Chief Operations Officer, and Danielle Bowman, who is the Chief Community Outreach and Engagement Officer. Oh, there you go.
Okay, cut us off.
No, cut us off.
Cut us off.
We just got
But they are part of the team, and they're going to be helping us out today as well. I just froze. Okay. So what is Melanin Mental Health? We are an organization that is committed to raising mental health awareness in Black and Latinx communities. We do this with our website, melaninmentalhealth.com, which has an online directory where you can find a culturally competent therapist in your area. We also have Between Sessions podcast that we record weekly. And we have our therapy is dope gear, melanated therapist. Can't really see mine today. But all of this is in the efforts of promoting mental health awareness in our communities and getting more people of color in therapy and in the mental health field as professionals. And that's why we have put together today this amazing panel of professionals who are going to lend their expertise as to how we can change the face of therapy. So let's introduce.
Yes. So we have Dr. Joy Harden, rapper.
Hey, y'all.
Licensed psychologist in Atlanta, Georgia, and the host of the popular mental health podcast, Therapy for Black Girls. Her clinical focus is helping women recover from breakups, and she is passionate about creating experiences and holding space for Black women to become the best possible version of themselves. Her work has been featured in Bustle, Women's Health, BuzzFeed, Teen Vogue, Essence, and the Oprah magazine. She was named in Huffington Post as one of the 10 Black female therapists you should know. When not in business mode, you can find her sipping a sweet tea and enjoying supper. A super competitive games of Hungry Hippos with her family. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Joy.
Absolutely.
So exciting. Okay, and then we have Dr. Nicole Coleman, who is an associate.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I know it said muted, but we can hear you.
Yes.
I know that. Okay, I just was nervous.
So Dr. Coleman is an associate professor of counseling psychology and assistant chair of student success in the Department of Psychological Health and Learning Sciences at U of H. She joined the faculty at UH in 2005 after being tenured track faculty at the University at Albany State University in New York from 2003 to 2005. Dr. Nicole earned her BS degree in psychology cum laude with honors from Xavier University of Louisiana and her PhD from the highly ranked APA accredited counseling psychology program at the University of Missouri Columbia. Her research interests broadly cover the intersection of race and gender impacting the sexual health and psychology of Black women. Specifically, she is interested in the role of media and stereotyping on Black women's sexual health and psychology.
Woo! Thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Nikki. We also have Rwenshaun Miller, mental health advocate and author. He's a therapist, speaker, and social entrepreneur, a licensed professional counselor. Rwenshaun services individuals spanning all ages with the goal of helping each person understand and take accountability for their own mental wellness. Rwenshaun completed his master's in clinical mental health counseling degree from Montreal. How do you say it?
Montreal.
Maybe he can't. Montreal College. I don't think he can hear us right now. Oh, okay. Thank you. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. As a speaker before audiences at universities, athletic and government organizations, corporations, churches, professional counselors, and more, Rwenshaun creates safe spaces for open and honest dialogue about mental health. He uses his personal experience of living with bipolar to educate others and break the stigma associated with mental health challenges. All right. Thank you, Rwenshaun. Oh, wait, let me say, You Stress. Yes. In 2013, Rwenshaun founded You Stress, Incorporated, a nonprofit that raises mental health awareness through educational and inspirational content, trainings, workshops, and an annual multi-city Let's Talk About It walk. Yes. Thank you, Rwenshaun, for joining us.
Yes. He's also the recipient.
Oh, yeah.
The recipient of the American Psychiatric Association Foundation Award for Advancing Minority Health. Awesome. So next we have Dr. Jess O'Reilly, who is a sex and relationship expert with a background in education. Her research and passion involves teacher training in sexual health, and she volunteers in schools and universities to help bring better sex and relationship education to the students across Ontario. Jess is also a television personality, author, podcast host of the Sex with Dr. Jess podcast, and international speaker who has facilitated hundreds of corporate workshops and retreats in 35 countries from Lebanon to Costa Rica. Woo!
Hi, Dr. Jess.
Yes, thank you for being here.
All right, we have Dr. Erlanger Turner, often referred to as Dr. Earl. He's a clinical psychologist and psychology professor here in Houston. Since earning his PhD from Texas A&M University, he has worked in outpatient settings in psychiatric clinics, providing therapy to children, adults, and families. His research and clinical expertise includes mental health issues among ethnic and racial groups, cultural competency, and access to mental health services for youth. Dr. Turner has published research on these topics and often serves as a media psychologist expert for local and national sources such as O Magazine, Washington Post, and Fox 26 in Houston. He is the immediate past chair of the Board of the Advancement of Psychology in the Public Interest for the American Psychological Association. Dr. Turner is the founder and owner of Turner Psychological and Consulting Services, which primarily provides training and seminars on diversity issues and minority mental health. Woo! Y'all have some bios.
Bios here, yes. All right, and last but certainly not least is Dr. Manuel Samarita, who is out in Austin, Texas. He is currently a clinician, consultant, cultural educator, and director of the Institute of Chicano Psychology. He conducts community workshops and professional development training for educators and mental health professionals on issues of cultural responsiveness and social justice. His clinical experience includes 15 years of working with individuals, adults, adolescents, couples, and families in community and school settings, rural and urban, from varied economic and cultural backgrounds. He is a licensed professional counselor and approved supervisor and received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in counseling psychology, his MS from Our Lady of the Lake in counseling psychology, and his BA from the University of Notre Dame in psychology. Wow. We are so excited to have all of you here. Oh my goodness, this is going to be so good. Thank you so much for taking time out of clearly your busy schedule.
Right. Thank you, guys. For those in the chat, we do have a hashtag for this event. If you're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, you can use the hashtag Changing the Face of Therapy. As you can see on the screen, when you do it on Twitter, it actually pops up and lets us know what you're saying about us. Please share, talk about what we discussed, any takeaways. We'd love to hear about it. And we'll probably feature some of them on our social media later on. So we want to go ahead and get started in this discussion because we're only here for a couple hours and we have so much to talk about. So before we kind of get into the questions that I sent, I wanted to discuss where everybody feels that minority mental health is right now. So what is the state of minority mental health? And then the follow-up question is, where do we need to go? So we'll start with Dr. Joy. We'll start with you.
Yeah, I think we are in a very exciting time for minority mental health. I'm excited about opportunities like this and events and, you know, just even discussions you see people having online related to mental health kinds of things. I just think it's a very exciting time and there's lots of growth happening. But I think where we need to go is what I think we're going to talk about tonight is making sure we have enough actual clinicians to meet the needs of all the people who are interested, and continuing the conversation so that people don't continue to feel stigmatized by reaching out for help.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Earl?
Sorry, mute. So, I mean, I think, again, I agree with Dr. Joy that we're in a good place. I think for me, one of the things that we need to do in terms of moving forward is making sure that we're not only increasing the representation of people of color as providers, but also that we're making sure that those that are white also have the training and background expertise to really navigate those relationships and dynamics, because we know that the majority of providers are non-people of color. And so we need to ensure that, you know, people feel comfortable working with a variety of therapists.
All right, Dr. Jess?
I'm going to echo their sentiments and also add that what I'm seeing is more people of color, white people, all people, but particularly older people coming forward and seeking therapy and counseling at a later stage in life, which is, you know, as Dr. Joe said, a really exciting time to see that there's growth in all, when we look at the different intersections of race and age and income. And I'm up here in Canada where a lot of our services are a little bit more accessible because of social programs. So as a Canadian, kind of looking, I don't want to say looking down, looking across the border, one thing we want to see across the globe, and as somebody who works more globally, is access not only to people in specific areas. And as e-therapy and e-counseling becomes more accessible, this is really, I think, shifting the landscape in a positive way.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Dr. Manuel?
Let me unmute. Oh, okay. I think we're approaching a good place for minority mental health right now. The field is really understanding the importance of cultural responsiveness, but I think what we'll talk about, I think what we're missing is the depth of what that means, what it means to be culturally responsive. So we have it in the ethical codes, we have it in the graduate classes, we have it as a talking point, as an important piece in the field. But I see a lot in the trainings and a lot of the clinicians and even in a lot of the clients that there's lacking, there's a certain depth that's lacking in terms of what it actually means in the room to be culturally responsive. So I think we're approaching a really important place, and I think we can see where we need to go still.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Nikki?
This is a complicated question for me. I agree with everybody so far. I think there's a much greater visibility and sense of accessibility for mental health for folks of color. But I also recognize, especially here in the U.S., I think it's generalizable across the globe, is that communities of color are also significantly distressed. Like, we're under a lot more day in and day out psychological struggle and taxing. So for me, it's hard to say that we're in a good place, because I think as a community, we're in a much more mentally distressed place than we have been in some time. And so that also informs a little bit of my answer about where we need to be going moving forward. I agree a little bit with Manuel in that I think the efforts have to mirror both the work that we do in terms of healing for clients that come to us, but I also think we need to be thinking about how we leverage the skills, access resources that we have, so that we can be more visible in the community and do some more preventative work as well.
Yeah. Awesome. There's a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure why.
Do you happen to have two devices with this going on right now?
No? Okay. It's fine.
Sorry.
It's okay. All right, Rwenshaun.
I feel like we are in a good place when it comes down to raising awareness, especially when we have a lot of athletes and celebrities actually talking about it. So it started to get the conversation going, and we're starting to reduce some of the stigma. But I think where we need to start heading is actually not just talking about it, but start creating action when it comes down to getting people into the actual service, helping, teaching them different skills to be preventive with, because I see a lot of individuals doing a lot of crisis care. So teaching individuals those skills to prevent that from going on.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I think these are the conversations that we've had a lot, and which is why we wanted to kind of have this on a larger scale, just figuring out, understanding what's happening now, and then trying to figure out how do we all work together to move forward.
Right. Because as so many of you have said, that is the direction where we want to go, where we can get more people of color in the profession. But in the meantime, that we don't, how can we include our white colleagues and other professionals to also be as interested and as excited about, addressing these issues? How do we do that? And I love what everybody's kind of saying is like, okay, we're talking about it now. How do we take it to that next level?
So, that's you.
Yes. So here's our second question. And that is, how do we get more people of color in the mental health field? We talk about this all the time. We're really curious to hear what some of your feedback is, or even what your experience was. How do we get more of us to get into the field?
Yeah. So let's start with Dr. Jess. Yeah. I should probably just unmute y'all when I. So, Dr. Jess, how do we get more?
From a marketing perspective, I think we need to just showcase those who are rocking it in the field, because it really is aspirational. If we do not see people who reflect what we look like or how we identify in positions, we don't aspire to it, whether it's teaching, acting, working in mental health, sports, any field. So the more people see other people of color making money, doing interviews, thriving, loving their work, building their brand, the more others want to follow in those same footsteps. So I think we all need to remind ourselves that it's cool and it's actually helpful to brag and showcase and let everybody know when things are good in business. And I think that it can be a struggle because when you think about who people turn to, sometimes it's the first page of the Google search. Sometimes it's the website that's like the shiniest or the prettiest, even if that person isn't the most qualified. So we need to be amplifying the voices of ourselves and of each other when we're doing well in the field. And that's really a business question more than I think specific to the mental health field.
Yes. We talk about that all the time.
A lot.
You don't have to take an oath of poverty to go into the field.
Yeah, and sometimes that discourages people from going into mental health because they don't see so many people doing well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dr. Manuel, I'm going to take you.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think one of the things, along with what Dr. Jess was saying, is we do need to pressure the field to do some more recruiting. I mean, there are several different ways to do it. And sometimes people have to go with what their strengths are. And so some people are really great about, pushing the field. They have that sense of advocacy, but that sense of advocacy doesn't always have to look the same for everyone, right? So some of the other things can be like visiting your alma mater, visiting grad school classes or undergrad psych classes, trying to make those connections. When you're having events, always offer to be a sponsor so your name gets out there when there's some mental health related events in the community. People love to have extra sponsors. It doesn't take too much. You get a tablecloth, something like that, get some flyers, some brochures. But be as visible as possible, I think. So on our part, on the ground, it's us, working a little harder to be visible. And then there should be some pressure on the field as well to continue to recruit, make those pathways from undergrad to grad school so that people can become licensed. There are other ways, but those stand out for me right now.
Right. Awesome, thank you.
So right. Visibility.
Visibility is a good one. Dr. Earl?
Yeah, I agree with everything that was said. And one of the audience members made a comment as well about representation of professors in academia of color, and so how that might provide a supportive environment for students to be able to enter into education to be professionals in terms of counseling. I think also at the undergraduate level, one of my things is always having open conversations with students about career development and going into mental health counseling professions. And I think a lot of students have a lot of fear about sort of the demands that it places on them in terms of going into graduate programs, but also being able to financially support themselves in graduate programs. So I think, again, part of that education piece is providing resources to students about that process, but also about funding opportunities for students when they decide to go into those programs, because a lot of students aren't aware that if they enter into a doctoral program, for example, that covers a lot of the funding. So you're not paying a lot of out-of-pocket fees in terms of tuition. So I think just helping students to be smart about their decision-making when it's time to think about whether they want to pursue a master's degree or a doctoral degree and what are their options for that.
Thank you.
Some more accessibility.
Yeah. Okay, Rwenshaun.
I think one of the important things is, especially as a Black man in the field, is just being visible, like everyone has said before, but then also making sure that individuals know that therapy doesn't always look like what you may see, whether it's a couch or in a setting of a hospital or anything like that. Making it, just going off your making it dope, and that way they want to engage in and then understand what it actually means to a therapist, and then you can add your own little spin to it. So I think that we'll get more people in it, but then also they'll get to explore, figure out if they really want to be.
everybody froze.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Oh, no.
Back.
You were back for a second.
Not anymore?
No, I think it's
Okay.
I hear you now, Evan.
Okay, awesome. Okay. Dr. Nikki, go ahead and answer. And then
Sure. So I've been in academia for almost 15 years now. And so I've had the opportunity to review a lot of graduate applications. And from where I sit in the institutions I've been, there's not a dearth of students that are trying to come in, students of color at least. But I think there's some people that come to the process misinformed. So I'd really echo a lot of what Dr. Earl was saying. I think part of our responsibility has to be really sitting down and having critical, like what I do is I call them like, let me remove the filter conversations for folks. Like you do have to have a strong GRE. So that means you got to do a little bit of thoughtfulness and preparing ahead of time. If you want to get into a doctoral program, you do need to be involved in research. That means you can't decide in your senior year, you're ready to apply. So I don't know if we're having those sorts of really critical, detailed conversations with young folks to help lay out the path that it's possible, but it's possible with these specific things in mind and to really do our best to prepare them. We also have a master's program in the program that I'm situated in. Proportionally, we get a lot more students of color, Black and brown, that apply for the master's program. But oftentimes their packages aren't very polished, or they'll have letters of recommendations from friends. And so really talking to people and grooming folks about what it means to get into graduate school and how it's different than undergrad. And then I think also being really clear about creating critical mass within programs, so students feel like they have people that are going through the experience with them. So when they're experiencing those disconnects, like Dr. Manuel has talked about in their programs, where they're not getting the depth or they're not seeing their culture really talked about, presented, explored in a way that feels authentic, that they also feel an agency and a voice to push programs to do that work a little bit better.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, and Dr. Joy.
Yeah, I will kind of continue the same vein related to kind of academia, because I think it's interesting when you have conversations with colleagues, how many of us have actually had very traumatic graduate school experiences. So, you know, as much as we're talking about like increasing in increasing the education and getting more students there, we also have to talk about what happens when they're there and how many we might be losing because those spaces are not often welcoming or affirming. So I do think as a field, we have to make sure that we're doing a good job of looking at the programs that we currently have and how can we make them more culturally affirming and accessible. And I also agree with the fact that the field has gotten a very bad PR rep. You know, there are still a lot of us who feel like we do have to have this oath of poverty. And there will be some shaming even of colleagues when you talk about, you know, like, okay, this is what I'm trying to do with my practice and those kinds of things. So I do think we have to have very honest conversations about the fact that you can actually have a very lucrative career in a mental health profession and do very well for yourself and your family.
Right. And I think we've talked about that before. It's having more of these business skills, whether you're going to be in private practice or going to work for someone else, because I think you're so right. That conversation comes up a lot when you talk about this being a business also. Mm-hmm. It's almost like, what? Like, why are you talking about this like it's a business? Well,
I'm not an entrepreneur.
Right. Right. And so I do think there is a disconnect from how can you also have those skills and have those conversations for the people who do have this entrepreneurial spirit as well, because I do think that is one of the deterrents to the field. Like, am I even going to be able to pay back my student loans? Right.
Yeah. And I think a big part, kind of like what you said, Dr. Joy, is the therapists are supposed to help people, and that's it. We're not supposed to be able to take care of our bills. Mm-hmm. Not in that language per se, but it's kind of like we're supposed to be givers. And unfortunately, can't do it for free, and so we have to be able to make a living off of it. And sometimes you do want to be able to make some money, and there can be some shame or judgment around it. So kind of getting past that as well. The next question is, so for those get more people of color in the field, more people of color in therapy. But until then, like we were saying, even if we got someone in the field like today, we found an 18-year-old, a host of 18-year-olds that said, yes, I want to be therapist. It's still going to take them anywhere between like 4 to 6 to 8 years to actually get into the place of practicing. So until then, how do we determine who we're referring to? How do we determine what non-minority clinicians or white clinicians that we feel comfortable sending people of color to and know they're going to be taken care of? So what are your personal, I guess, checklists, or what do you look for, or what do you think is important that they know? So we can start with Dr. Manuel.
All right. Let's see.
Can you? I didn't get the question.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It was what we, as we're waiting to get more people of color in the field, we know we have to refer to non-minority clinicians. We are referring to white clinicians. So how do you determine what makes you feel comfortable referring people of color to white clinicians and knowing that they're not going to get more trauma or any other issues happening when they go to therapy? Are there things that you look for when you're looking to refer clients to white clinicians and getting them involved in trainings and things like that as well?
Yeah, so I have several things. One is that one of the things that I look for is that can this clinician be non-defensive about issues of culture? Of course, number one. One of the things still is that culture and issues of cultural responsiveness seems to be an addendum. And so one of the things I come back with is like, well, we still have to have, CEUs and ethics, CEUs and tech, we have to keep up with techniques. So it's, the issues of culture are core to what we do. And so if I have a white colleague that understands that culture is just as important as ethics, as theory, as technique, as crisis, then that's, okay, because those are the things you need to be, responsive to. The other thing that I like to talk about when I do, because I do a lot of trainings with the mental health community, and so a lot of the times I get a lot of white colleagues that come in, and so there are many ways to approach this, but one of the ways that people, I think, at least get to hold on to is I talk a lot about individualistic and collectivistic values. And so when I get people to understand like family's importance, community's importance for a lot of minority communities, that challenges what I call the individualistic bias in the field. Okay? One of the things I always mention is, what do we equate health with? Mental health. We equate self-esteem, right? Self-awareness, self-concept. We don't say that we think that's one piece of health. We equate that with health. What that does is it completely eliminates us spending time and looking at relational esteem, relational health, relational aspects. And for communities of color, relationship and community and family is just as important. And so I always say it's a both and, it's not an either or. The individualistic piece, super important. Self-concept, super important. But we're not even talking about the relational aspect. The individualistic bias of our field equates individualism with health. And that's a problem, because that means the opposite of that is seen negatively, right? So I always try to bring that up, and then through that lens, introduce different cultural values and cultural perspectives, so that we can have these kind of more complex conversations.
Yeah, which is kind of what we were talking about last week. With, how is that taken into consideration? Something that might be pathologized and not taking into consideration these different aspects of our cultures.
Right. All right, Dr. Nikki. Oh, actually,
I have the non-politically correct answer to that question.
That's fine.
I actually don't refer clients or people that come to me to white clinicians. If I get a lot of folks that ask me, hey, do you know somebody that can do this? And I have developed a network. There's enough folks here in Houston, especially where we live. And to some extent, I have relationships with folks through my professional organizations, so through subdivisions of APA, through Association of Black Psychologists, that I can get a pretty good footprint across the nation. And I try to refer folks of color to folks of color. I have been a client before with white therapists and have not found that experience affirming. I found it helpful at times, but always still felt like there was a piece of me, that central kind of soul component of me, that wasn't quite connected with. And so if I can get folks connected with folks of color, then that's what I'm gonna do. I'm sorry, I have such a bad echo. I don't know what to do about it.
No, I don't. Yeah, it's showing you in the room twice. But I can't figure out how to kick you out.
It looks like you're in here twice.
And I will only see me once. Let me see.
And I think you know, we've talked about that recently, which when we are in communities, you know, such as Houston, where Houston is so diverse, and we have that luxury of having a diverse source of clinicians. It is wonderful. That's why we started Melanin and Mental Health. That was actually the conversation that brought us together. You know, I met Ebony after following her online, and that was the question. It's like, well, where are all the other Black and brown therapists? That was,
Yeah.
You know, that's how we started started Melanin and Mental Health. And so I guess the big what if though is still what happens to the areas where there are not, you know, as diverse populations. What can we continue to do? But yes,
definitely. Dr. Julie.
I'm
sorry. Yeah.
I think our training programs have to just do a lot more. Like right now, I'm in an APA accredited program. It requires one course in multiculturalism, and we work as a program to try to talk about issues of culture in other areas. So in theories, in pro seminar, in whatever. But it still becomes about this, right? So if you want to be a really a culturally competent clinician working with Black folks, you're not going to get that from the little teaspoon drop. So it takes a whole lot of work postgraduate for folks, and for white folks in particular, it takes a whole lot of work on their own white privilege. And none of that is, like, that's not easy. The system is set up to not make them do that. So I think we have to be really cautious about the sort of standards that we set for folks when we're referring people out.
Right. Okay, Dr. Dan, I'm gonna ask you, can you exit out and come back in and see if that might help the echo?
Dr. Nikki.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I said that. What did I say?
No, I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know
Dr.
if you heard.
Nikki, yeah.
Did you hear us, Dr. Nikki? Yeah.
So I'm gonna go. I hope I come back. If not, this is fun.
We're gonna look for you.
Hey, y'all.
Thank you.
Great.
Right. It was so much.
Come on by. We're over here at
Did we lose everybody? Did the whole panel shut down?
I think we all got kicked out.
We're back. Okay, all the guests are still here, so.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious.
Why am I here twice?
Are you also on your phone? Are you also on your phone?
No.
You see, we're community. One person gets cut off. Relationship.
Oh, your picture is showing up twice, Rwenshaun. Oh, your picture is showing up twice, Rwenshaun.
Oh yeah, you're there twice.
Right.
Even the typing is crazy.
All right, Dr. Nikki took everybody with us when she left.
She said, if I'm leaving, everybody's leaving.
Okay. It's still going kind of slow. Okay, Dr. Joy, if you can, I took you off. Answer the question. Okay, so how do you
What were we talking about?
Right. How do you decide? There we go. How do you decide what white clinicians and non-minority clinicians to refer to if you have clients that don't fit anyone within your network that you can refer to?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Dr. Nikki. I don't actually refer to anybody who I don't have somewhat of a relationship with, or that at least has a relationship with somebody that I have a relationship with. So I only will refer to other therapists, non-people of color therapists who can be vouched for in some kind of way.
Okay.
She said she got a whole directory.
Got a therapy for Black girls, you'll find somebody.
Here's my
Right. But that is one of the really cool things about having doing the work that I've been able to do, is that I've been able to connect with therapists from across the country in amazing ways. So it's very likely that somebody will know somebody who they can get a referral to.
Well, and that's part of why we wanted to do this, because we will still often get messages, or, people will tag us in different stuff and say, well, there are no Black therapists, or there are no brown therapists. And we're like, yes, there are.
We'll find them.
Yeah. And I think,
right.
We're in the field and we know about all this greatness that everybody's doing, but we forget sometimes that not everybody does.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, Rwenshaun, what about you? How do you decide as far as referring out to white clinicians?
Similar to Dr. Nikki and Dr. Joy, man, I try to limit referring out to people outside of people of color, because for one, I noticed that a lot of times they have stipulations when it comes down to addressing these individuals, and a lot of the individuals that reach out to me looking for types of services, they have other barriers, whether it be insurances, whether it be they to an office or anything, and then some people are just not comfortable with addressing those needs to actually do the actual therapy. So I'm very cautious about referring out, and then I do a lot of similar to everyone else. I build a directory of my own people that I can refer to. When it comes down to, a lot of times I get a lot of recommendations for, well, they want recommendations for men. Now that's difficult, but still try to find someone that looks like the individuals that are reaching out. And then also when it comes down to referring out to someone that's white, I have to think about, are they comfortable with having that conversation about being white? Because I mean, if they're trying to dance around culture, it's not going to work.
Right.
Well, and I think you all are making a good point that so often people that come to us, and they went on the website, that was one of the main reasons that they're seeking us out, because they're going to have somebody that looks like them, that's going to represent them. And so I think, that is one of the reasons why sometimes it is difficult, and why we're trying to build these networks so that we can be connected.
Right. Okay, Dr. Earl. All the doctors.
And doctors and training.
I almost want to pass on this question because I'm currently not doing the work. But I do get a fair amount of referrals being in Houston because I am a Black male, and they're often looking for male therapists. But and so I try to reach out to my network of other providers in the area to see if they can provide a resource to them. I think one of the issues that Dr. Manuel mentioned earlier is that this idea in training programs, when we focus on on therapy approaches is often from a Western perspective and really not thinking about this idea. I mean, I think we talk a lot about culture, but I think for a lot of clinicians, it's not culture that they have issues with. It's the issue of talking about race. And so when we have clients of color that are going to work with those individuals, then, I mean, it's so much going on in society right now that you could be impacted in a number of ways by things that are going on in your community or even just that you see on social media. And so if your therapist isn't comfortable having those discussions and dialogue with you in a healthy manner, then it's not going to be helpful for them. And so I think that's one of the issues that we do need to address in terms of training, is sort of getting outside of this idea of how we conceptualize culture and really thinking about sort of going back again to sort of these individual views within a particular group or community, and how much those values are really important in terms of reflecting how you address people's overall wellness.
Awesome. Dr. Jess, we didn't ask you, right?
Yeah, I kind of chimed in on the text, and there, you know, the guests are chiming in as well. So I'm mixed race, and I'm Chinese, and Chinese from Jamaica, and trying to find other Asian therapists is, of course, a challenge, despite the fact that I'm located in Toronto, where there are more East Asian people than there are white people. We still lack in the therapy and mental health field. And so I like, so everything that you've all said makes sense to me. I make an effort to refer to other people of color for two reasons. Number one is that a lot of the clientele coming to me are people of color, and they're looking for somebody who has some understanding, who has the cultural competency. I had a white therapist. My very first therapist personally was white. And Dr. Nikki summed it up so well. It was helpful, but not affirming. And as soon as we ran into the issue of family, their solution was always like, it was very individualistic. And it was really much at odds. And so even as somebody in this field, I have struggled with this. So what I found is that, thank goodness for our wonderful digital spaces, now we really can make more of an effort to find people who are more like us or who are more like our clientele. We don't have to just settle for whoever is local. And I put in comments that just the word white privilege, if they can't respond to that, because we know that it's, you know, they shut down or they reject or they make excuses or they really believe in some degree of a meritocracy. I think that there's no litmus test, but that's a really good place to start. And very smart guest number 234 said if they respond to white privilege with some sort of pushback, then our programs or mental health training programs have failed them. But the reality is they're run by white people. We're still being taught by white people. We're being told by white people, you know, statistics that it doesn't really affect students or clients, that the ethnicity or race of a professor or of a counselor doesn't affect the outcome. But we can tell you it does. I don't really care what your data that you're collecting says. We can tell you that. So this is an important conversation, and I think that this, like, kudos to you for putting this all together, because now we have even more people to whom we can refer, because I'm sure many of you and also many of the guests here who are in the mental health field work online and can do some of that work online. Of course, there are limitations, but try not to refer out unless they have, unless they're white.
Yeah. You want to mention what happened in the comments when we posted the event?
Well, yes. So yes, we're going to tell you all together. So that happened just with us promoting this event. You know, we were like, okay, we're doing something, because we just got our first person to get upset about this.
Was really upset about this event.
Yes, just even the idea that we would suggest that white clinicians were not culturally competent. And so we're like, right?
So
like
made a big time.
Yeah, that's what I messaged her right away. It's like, oh, we're doing something, because we just got somebody upset about what we're doing. But yeah, it was just that. It's like, I am offended that you would even suggest that white clinicians are not culturally competent. And so that even took us aback, even us knowing what we were doing and our intention behind it, that we would maybe get some pushback. But it was like, wow, that was fast.
Right. And it really affirmed this is the right thing to do, because the fact that all we said was, how do we get white clinicians to be involved in the conversation?
It was how do we get them to be culturally competent?
And that they initially, defensiveness. Right. I think that's what Dr. Manuel said. defensiveness was the first reaction.
That was it.
And so
saying they were offended.
And saying they were offended.
Go back and rewrite.
And told us how we should run the event and what we should say in the event.
I love the response. The response is great.
Yeah. Thank you. Took a couple days for us to get that together, but yes, it really made me feel like that was, it made it more necessary because, you know, if the topic of race makes you that defensive, it gets you that worked up, just because we suggested that maybe we could use some more training. We also suggest that we could use some more training when it comes to our cultures, other cultures, LGBT. We all could use more training. It was just kind of like that. Okay, well, this is why we're doing this, because we have to be able to have these conversations and to be able to have them in a way where we know what we can do maybe moving forward. But if we can't even have the conversation or even suggest that it's an issue, I think there's no way that we're going to be able to change the face of therapy. Right. So, right. So, you want to talk about the one that can be changed? Is that where we're at? Yeah. Wow. This is so good. I'm like sitting here. I'm like, okay, so what? So as we're working on, so what is? I'm going to ask everybody. So what is the greatest? What do you think is the greatest need, or that one piece that can change the direction of mental health in our communities? So if there was one thing you could focus on as far as being the greatest gap or the next move, what would you say is the one thing that we really need to kind of hone in on? Did I explain that? Did I explain that clearly enough? Did y'all get the question? Okay. Let's start with Dr. Nikki now. Let's see what's going on. Dr. Nikki, you picked all of us out when you got out. When you went out, you took it.
Look, I made my apologies before I did it, so.
No, there's no echoes. Yes.
So let me just make sure I get the question. What's the one thing folks of color we need to do to change what? What's the question?
What is the one thing that you would focus on now? Like if there's one piece that you believe is either the greatest gap still within our field to be able to change the face.
Yeah. I took the question from like this accessibility standpoint. For me, I know we still talk a lot about stigma, and for me, I think what I've come to think about is less about stigma than really collectively reconceptualizing what mental health is. I think we still think I gotta be crazy, right? I gotta be on the verge of a nervous breakdown, or I gotta be so distressed that everything is falling apart before I go get help. And one of the things that I think has helped us out a lot in popular media, especially with younger folks, in podcasts around the room, and social media, is that I think we are beginning to expand this definition of like mental health. But I think that we have to continue to have that conversation. So I always talk about folks as like being walking wounded. So I think there's a lot of people walking around and they're functional. They're doing well. They've done all the things that society has told them to do. They got a good education. They got a good job. They take care of their households. But internally, they are in so much turmoil and distress, but yet they don't recognize that they're the like optimal client to come in for outpatient services. But I think we have to do a better job of talking about the real relationship between stress and mental health for folks, so that it does open up the sense that, oh, maybe I could go see a therapist. And related to that, I think the marketing issue too, that sometimes people think, oh, I got to go to therapy for years, or now that I go, I'm going to be in it forever. And the reality is, I talk to people about going to therapy as like maintenance, right? If you bought a really nice car today, you're going to get that oil changed so you could keep that really nice car. And to take your mental health in the same way, like maybe like stuff is just real tight right now. And so you go in and you get some support, you get lifted, you get clear about where you want to go. You have a home stretch of about 3 or 4 years and something else comes up, and you can always go back to therapy. It's not a one and done, I'm healed, I'm fixed, and then I never have to go back again. I think being able to just really be more expansive about our sense of mental wellness in conjunction with physical wellness, sexual wellness, financial wellness, spiritual wellness, all of that is where we need to be putting our efforts.
Yes, yes. You don't have to be in crisis to go to therapy.
Right. Dr. Earl? I'm just kind of calling out randomly, just like it's no rhyme or reason, right?
I mean, I want to echo what was said. I almost wanted to just say that Dr. Nikki just covered everything. But I think I do agree with what she said, and particularly the part about this idea about public education around mental health. And one of the things that I've been talking a lot about lately is really distinguishing between mental health versus mental illness, because I think people have a good sense of what mental illness is, but not about mental health. And so I think we do need to get back to that in terms of really re-educating the public about what it means to be mentally healthy, and maybe that will erase some of the stigma that's associated with receiving services, because I think a big part of that is really focused on the mental illness aspect of it. But one of the things for me in terms of something that was mentioned earlier in the chat, and I think as a field, looking at the representation of who the providers are in terms of gender differences, and that we know that the field is heavily female dominated, and not that that's anything wrong with that, but I think we need to really start to address the need for men, and specifically Black men, because there's a need for that, and there aren't that many that go into the field, and so I think we really do need to sort of shift that narrative. And again, be more supportive and encouraging. And so one of my missions is really trying to mentor, undergraduate students or graduate students in the profession, and sort of provided them some of the feedback, getting real, as Dr. Nikki mentioned, with them about the whole process, because it's not all fun. But if you want to sort of get that reward at the end, you sort of have to fight those battles to get to where you want to be. And then make that decision about how you want to use your own expertise, and that you don't have to go into academia, what your sort of mentor sort of envisions for you to see. Because I think people sort of get sort of on a path, and then people sort of push you one way, and you sort of have to remember that once you get that degree, you can use your own voice and sort of navigate and make your decision about what you want to do with
that. I think that idea of mentorship is so important, right. Especially, like, for example, when I went to school, I was first generation. I was the first one in my family to go to college, let alone go on and get a graduate degree. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're just kind of stumbling. I took a lot, taking weight training classes, taking just classes you don't need because I didn't know, right? So having that mentorship to say, this is where you want to go, this is where you got, these are the things you need to do, right? Yeah, because especially, like I said, being first generation and not knowing what any of that meant.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Manuel.
Yeah. Well, first I want to continue with this idea of mental wellness and what therapy can mean. And one of the metaphors that I use a lot of the times is when you see your physician. If you go to your physician and they treat you and you get sick again, does that mean that medicine doesn't work? Excuse me. No, it's just, you go back, right? So like if an issue comes up in therapy and it works out and something similar comes back, it doesn't mean that, oh, therapy didn't work. It's just like any other health issue. Sometimes maybe you need something a little different, a different approach, or it just, it's something that you need more time with, right? So I think the metaphor of using your physician also is a good one when we're talking about wellness, because sometimes you need to get the medications right. But that could mean the approach. It could mean if you get a second opinion, you don't get the right fit with your physician, it means you don't have the right fit with your therapist. It doesn't mean therapy doesn't work, right? So I think if we think about it in that way, people, understand that notion of a physician metaphor and giving what that means for your health, right? So I think it's similar with mental health. But in terms of what I would address, I think one of the things that we need to start turning to is looking at the strengths that our culture has. Our various cultures, we come with cultural strengths that we have been disconnected from or that aren't valued. And so there's this phrase in Spanish that says "la cultura cura," which means the culture cures. And so I think therapists of color, I think it would be good to reconnect our cultural strengths and our cultural values to the process. One of the things that we do is we notice how a lot of our people don't go to therapy, right? They don't value the process, and we come with a lot of good training and a lot of good knowledge, and particularly when we're culturally responsive. But part of what we're still doing is we're taking that westernized knowledge and we're bringing it to our people, and we're not including the knowledge that our people already have, right? The strengths that we have. And so that means reconnecting to those strengths and those pieces that we already carry within our lineage. And so one of the ways that we try to fill the gap in the Institute is that we have these community workshops, these pláticas, right? These small talks. And what it is, it's bringing the psychological knowledge to the people, right? It's not a lecture, it's not a training. It's what are the needs of the people and how can we talk in a way that is responsive and that uses the language of the people. So bringing the knowledge to the people and also having the people talk through the ways that they've gotten through difficulties in their life, the ways that their family has, their uncles, their grandparents, and capturing those pieces that are part of those cultural strengths and saying you can utilize this, and also going to therapy isn't so scary, right? So it's not just promoting therapy, it's also that other piece, which is you have help. You have help in your people, in your family, in your community, and how do we get that? Just real quick, because I'm going a little long, but one of the things that I get often when I say that is, well, our people and our community and our families have a lot of dysfunction, right? We're very enmeshed. So how can we look to our people if we have all of this dysfunction? And I think that's half true. As we probably all know on this panel, half of that dysfunction comes from survival techniques generated back that we needed to employ, right? So we have historical trauma, passed down trauma, intergenerational trauma. And so the example that I use is that there was a time when a lot of our kids, if they crossed the wrong street or they approached the wrong person, they could get hurt or they could die. So the parents said, "Don't cross the street," yelling, right? So, and those behaviors come down, and now we see our parents, well, why are you yelling at your kids? That's not good parenting. Well, yes, but that has a legacy. Or, kids, I don't know about y'all's families, but running outside anywhere barefoot was tragic. Don't go anywhere barefoot. You're going to get sick.
Yes.
Why? Or care. Because we couldn't afford medical care. So you could get the flu, you could get the cold, you could die. So in the current generation, we're talking about parenting and parent education, and that is all true. But we have to have a historical lens because what our people were doing was they were trying to survive, right? And so we have to take those pieces that are healthy and that are strong and remember those pieces as historically. Again, we have this individualistic bias. We can tell when we're codependent, right? Or when families are enmeshed.
Right.
But the other thing is, well, what happens to these families, often these white families that are very individualistic, right? That's the healthy way. How does dysfunction look in those families? And that's really easy. That's self-harm, that's cutting, that's anorexia, because they have families that aren't communal. They have families that value the individual, right? So the question is, when does that become unhealthy and when is that healthy? So it's the same thing for our families. We're very communal, we're very interrelated, and there can be some real strength to that, and there can be some dysfunction. We don't throw it all out. We have to filter out what our cultural legacies are, what our cultural strengths are, and amplify those. And we need to integrate that into mental health. I saw something on Instagram from another Chicano guy that was saying, therapy's crazy. If you go to therapy, you're weak. we should be able to handle this stuff on our own, individually. If you have to go to talk to somebody about your problems, you failed. And I was completely surprised and astonished because that's a completely colonized mentality. Do you know what our people did when we had problems? We went to our elders. We talked in circles. We shared stories. That's what all of our indigenous peoples did. We always told our problems to people. We never handled it on our own in our family. We went to the circle. We went to the community. And so we've lost that part. That what I'm starting to say is therapy is ours. Truly, therapy is ours. That is how we've always maintained health historically, ancestrally in our communities. We've talked in circles, we've talked to elders, we've reached out, we've been community minded. If we look at the core of what the mental health field professes, therapy is ours. It's not solely ours, it belongs to our white colleagues too, but it is ours.
Yeah.
So,
Therapy is both.
sorry.
It's ours.
I think this, Elisa always talks about how, I guess, modern therapy, modern mental health was never made for our communities. It wasn't created for us. And I think that's a really good point of, no, this really is what we did. It's just the way they have structured it and set it up wasn't meant for us.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the processes don't work for us.
Right.
Exactly.
And so that's part of what we're talking about is, I think so many times that's part of why people shy away from it because not understanding, what it's going to look like. So,
Right.
Love that. Thank you for that, Dr.
Yes. All right, Dr. Jess, you're back.
Dr. Jess is back. Yay.
But I fear I missed all the valuable stuff you said, and I don't want to repeat. The only thing I might add that maybe hasn't been said is that I, as someone who's not working in academia, but went to school, I wonder if there needs to be a more radical push against the current academic system, because you talked about like having to be unfiltered and explain that, for instance, you can't take a reference letter from a friend, you might require it from a professor. And as people of color, you might have less access to professors. Professors, you don't look like them. And there's, of course, been research that says that a professor will give extra help to certain people who look a certain way, of a certain gender and skin tone, before they will to other people. So I wonder if rather than, just transformative and accessing the current system, if there needs to be a little shakeup of the system so that people can become mental health practitioners via different or more accessible means. Of course, there are programs that exist. I know in the States you have Howard, but I think that just the whole system needs a bit of a shakeup to make it more accessible to people. And it's not just, sponsors, or not sponsors, but scholarships. I think there's a bit more to it than that, where like maybe we need a more radical approach to say that there needs to be a shakeup where we make, I don't know what the answer is, but I just think that maybe there's a little bit more dismantling that is required rather than just transforming within the current system, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank
Definitely.
you for that.
Yes. Dr. Joy? Oh, I thought somebody was saying something. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Did you call me, Ebony?
Dr. Joy.
Okay. Yeah, I think if we also stay with the analogy that Dr. Manuel offered in terms of like seeing our physician, we also need to keep in mind that our physicians can see 4 to 6 people in an hour where we see 1. And they also will get paid more than your typical mental health professional. And so I think there also needs to be some real conversation and shakeup related to insurance. Because if we're talking about accessibility, we know that still lots of people of color are wanting to use their insurances, but lots of therapists have also made the decision for themselves, for their own livelihood, to not accept insurance anymore, right? And so, there's a mismatch there. And I think that we do have to really push on some of these insurance companies to talk about why mental health professionals are not getting paid at the same rates as other professionals.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and it's funny because we've been discussing just scholarship and just different options outside of just going straight through insurance. And what does that look like where people that need the financial help can get it, but also the clinicians actually get paid a livable wage and can survive. And so how do we bridge that gap?
Right.
So I think that's a really important area that needs to be figured out, because insurance doesn't seem to be the way. It's not helping.
And I think it really depends too. It goes back to that business conversation of what your business model is for your practice. But some people master it, that whole Danielle, they're able to work with it. And, some of us, it's not part of the business model, but what are the options and what are we creating in the field to have more accessibility?
Yeah. All right. So we're talking about the gap.
We're talking about what is the one thing you would do that you think really needs to be focused on for us to continue changing the face of therapy. Okay. What is that?
All right. And so I think we haven't heard from Rwenshaun yet.
Rwenshaun.
Oh, did I need to take you off mute?
Oh, there we go. Now, can you hear me now?
Wait, I'll put you back on mute. Hold on. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think everybody touched on some great points. And then one thing that I also would like to highlight is the fact of how we diagnose our individuals. Especially a lot of young Black men that I see, they receive the diagnosis of ADHD or ODD or any of those types of things. And we got to understand that all of these diagnoses look different by person and by culture. So we also need to address those issues as well when it comes down to how we placing these labels on these individuals. Because when we place these labels on them, they come with different medications and different treatment techniques as well. And if you don't place the right label on them, you're not going to treat them the right way. So you may have them on a medication that it's not really effective for them, or you may be using a different modality that does not effective for them. And then so they're going to constantly stay in therapy and they're not going to get any better. And then they'll get turned off by therapy. And then once they get turned off by therapy, it's a ripple effect because they'll end up telling other people, oh, well, all they want to do is put me on meds. And our culture, we spread stuff quickly. So once you get that, once you get that bad rep, that's it.
Yeah. That's definitely true. The diagnosis.
That piece. I think that's a really important piece, and I've appreciated everybody's input. And I think in particular this diagnosis / medication piece is really where we see the most problematic impact of systematic oppression on our people, in the sense that more often than not, those are the folks that are providing diagnosis and medication attached to that have had the least amount of training with regard to any idea around culture and the intersection thereof. And I think for us also, piggybacking a little bit off of what Manuela was saying, is that if we folks from the community take a kind of medical model on it, we think, well, just give me a pill so that I can feel better. Well, we don't recognize that there's a whole lot of interplay that could be happening in between those things, that oftentimes people are mismedicated, over-medicated, improperly diagnosed. And we all know from working in systems is once you get a diagnosis attached to you within the system, we see various shades, but it doesn't really ever go away. And the problems can become multiply compounded, which is why one of the other things that I always talk to folks about is like, you have to be your own agent, even as a client. And I've been fortunate to get a couple. So right now I have a small private practice. I see all Black women clients. I'm so excited about it. I had a client ask me just this past week at the end of the, she was like, is this fun for you? And I was like, fun isn't the right word, but I get such a sense of joy out of the opportunity to work with other Black women in a healing clinical space. But several of them have come to me because they went to someone else that didn't give them what they needed. And I always give them all sorts of props for saying, this isn't meeting my needs, I'm going to go find somewhere else. And so I think the other thing is we have to talk to people when we talk about going to get mental health services. You might have to shop around.
Right.
That it's okay if you go to session 2, you go to session 3, and you feel like this person is not getting me. Like, I don't feel heard. I feel cold. I feel disconnected. Then you have to say, this therapist is not the therapist that for me, not that therapy doesn't work. Right. We have to start to change that narrative and that conversation as well.
Definitely.
Yes.
Okay, so we're gonna get into the. I don't know what's happening. All right, so we're gonna, but before we do that, I do want to give everybody an opportunity to share how they are actually changing the face of therapy. What are you doing within the mental health community, within the health game, as Elisa likes to say, to change what we're seeing and to help those communities?
What are you doing now?
What are you doing
we know
now?
y'all are doing a lot.
So we'll just go through and just what do you have going on? How are you hoping to change the face of therapy? So Dr. Earl, we'll start with you.
So one of the things that I'm currently doing, which I probably should be doing now, is I'm working on a book on African American mental health. And really sort of, again, changing the face of therapy in terms of addressing this idea of cultural sensitivity, something that Dr. Manuel talked about earlier in terms of really thinking about this idea of therapy being from sort of a Western approach and how we need to also think about the collectivism, particularly within the African diaspora and thinking about how that really fits into working with different populations. And so that's something that I'm really excited about. It's due to my publisher in a couple of months, and so hopefully within the next year, it'll be in press. And so really, I think it'll be helpful, not just for therapists of color, but also for white clinicians and really understanding some of the nuances and really important things that you need to think about in terms of race-related stress and how that impacts individuals, and also thinking about how we conceptualize people's understanding of what it means to go to therapy and how those relationships between the therapist and sort of historical events plays into those interactions as well that we really need to think about.
Right. Awesome. That's awesome. All right. Dr. Manuel, we have another guest. Dr. Manuel, what are you doing right now?
So I think what we're trying to do is a couple of things. With the Institute of Chicano Psychology, those community workshop pláticas that we're having is one of the ways we're trying to change the face, because in that we do talk about, we're sure to include some of the most current research, some of the educational pieces of what's happening in the mental health field. And so afterwards, people have a lot of questions about, like, if this is what therapy can look like, then I'm in, right? And one piece, again, that I mentioned too, that we're trying to actively do is include some of our ancestral medicine, some of our indigenous ways, and that can be healing. And when you're coming from, like a lot of us, in a lot of ways, from colonized peoples, right, where our knowledge has been cut off, a lot of the times when we're introduced to some of these ancestral ways, we feel like, well, I don't feel comfortable because I don't know that much about it. I'm not sure. But that, that's what reconnecting means, right? It's okay. You don't have to know completely about it. We've had more time as people with that medicine than we've had disconnected from it historically, right? So, so one of the things is I try to use some of the stuff that's become popular in the mental health field and show how that's already rooted in what we know or what we've known before. We talk a lot today about grounding, right? Especially if clients are in crisis, right? You need to ground them. Well, a lot of indigenous people literally practice grounding. You go outside, you take off your shoes, you take off your socks, you feel the earth beneath you. And all of that, you just feel all of that stress kind of taken into the earth. Right? Taking a shower, the power of water. Water is one of the most sacred elements. We take a shower, and people say take a shower, feel good. But if you, with intention, feel that water washing over you, feel that stress coming out. The water, if you believe in some of the indigenous practices, then
Right.
that water is medicine, and it is taking that stress from you. It doesn't take the place of all of our knowledge of therapy, but what it does is it shows that we have had a piece in unity before. It shows those are things that the people, the community, can connect to without therapizing them, and giving them all the psychological jargon. Right? And then we can have conversations where we add knowledge that we do know, right? So what? So and then the professional trainings, we have a series that I like to call Brown Your Counseling, right? And what is the Brown Your Counseling, right? And so it means a lot of the things we talked about, not having an individualistic only bias. The DSM is a great example of that. There are no, and they probably never will be, this is a larger conversation, which would really radicalize the field. There are no relational diagnosis, doesn't exist. That if that doesn't tell you how individually biased the field is, you can only have a diagnosis if it's within the individual. That's epistemology. That says that that's the root cause of disorder, and that's the only way to treat the disorder is within the individual. It has nothing to do with our connection to people. There are no relational diagnoses, and there never will be probably. But that's bigger than what we're talking about. But the idea of recognizing that individualistic bias and understanding that we can work from a decolonized perspective. It doesn't mean we throw everything out that we've learned. It just means we add to it, and we don't privilege the Western knowledge over our knowledge, right? Now, we don't have a lot of the language. How do we talk about our ancestral knowledge? That's because we haven't been doing it. But just because we don't have the language around it doesn't mean we shouldn't start doing it. And so I think that's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Manuel.
Thank you. All right, Rwenshaun, what are you doing to change the face of therapy?
Get that list out. Rwenshaun, tell us that list. We know you're doing a list.
Well, one thing, I work a lot in the community, and I do mental health awareness walks. I actually just hosted a mental health awareness gala, but it's not just to raise awareness, but it's also to connect individuals across the city where I live in Charlotte, so that we'll know who are the therapists that we actually need to be able to refer to and connect with. But then also that way, the students that are in programs in the city as well, they're able to connect with professionals, and it's a relaxed atmosphere where we can actually connect. But then also, I host a weekly call where I do it's called Locker Room Talk, where it's men of color all across the nation, man. We call in every Wednesday night, and we just get on the phone and we talk about different issues that address that pertain to our mental health, but it's not specific for mental health. But it could be relationship problems. We can talk about politics. We can talk about money. We talk about any and everything on that call every week, and it's just forming that sense of community. It's therapy in a sense, but it's not as formal. And then it also creates that space where individuals can share about themselves, but they don't have to be face to face, and it makes them a little bit more comfortable to actually open up about certain things. What else I got? I'm teaching men yoga, so just different methods for them to address those stressors. Host a monthly yoga class or for men of color, and we just get in there. I mean, and we start at the basics, man, because yoga could be very intimidating for men to actually join, especially when you're going in there and it's a bunch of women and they're getting in all these different poses, and then you just start to fall back. So also doing meditation classes, and just holding group sessions, but they're very informal where we just color. And just a lot of different things in the community just to teach them different ways to address their stresses and find ways to not only disconnect, but then also be very intentional on how they utilize their energy. I know it's a lot of other stuff that I got going on, but yeah.
You wrote a book.
Oh yeah, I wrote a book as well to address mental health issues, but it's told from my own personal story, living with bipolar disorder and also attempting suicide 3 times. But then also with that book, it challenges the reader to address their own issues. So it's called a playbook. So it also, as I tell my story, I challenge the reader to pick up on certain signs and symptoms within yourself or within family members as well.
I think what somebody put about the call saying it is therapy. I think what you just described, those different events that you have going on, is a good example of how therapy can be outside of the therapy.
That's right.
And how it doesn't have to look the way we've always taught, where we're just sitting across from each other and talking to each other. So when we have these more access,
Right.
more people will be interested when it's not that whatever they think that
Right.
it is. And so I think that's amazing.
All of that is therapeutic.
All of it is therapeutic, right?
Right.
Thank you. All right. Dr. Nikki.
What do I do? Let's see. Too many things. One is I continue to stay at a Research One institution. Technically, U of H is a Hispanic serving institution. I say that technically, intentionally. It's still in its practices. It's still in its institutional practices and structures, still predominantly white identified. And I stay there, and every year there's a reassessment of whether that's the best place for me to be. But I stay there because I recognize the role that I have as a gatekeeper. I have been very proud to say that I've graduated 8 Black women PhDs in my time that are out in the field, that are Black women identified, that are going out to do things. And I currently also have 2 Black women advisees and an Iranian American advisee. So students of color come to work with me and come to get their training. Also, while at U of H, I do peer review publications in the area, trying to increase our representation and understanding about Black women's sexuality and have that be recognized and respected within the broader field of psychology. Been trying to do more to do blogging and do more with op-eds in the Houston Chronicle to make some of these psychological concepts, especially around race, oppression, and social justice, more accessible to folks. I have a podcast called Doopy Deep with Dr. Nikki. You can get me on iTunes, Google Play, and Spreaker is our platform that we use for that. We talk about a whole lot of issues with regard to culture and mental health and intersections thereof. And I have a small private practice as well, where I see clients on Thursdays, 1 day a week. I feel like there's something else that I'm forgetting. Oh, and working with a colleague, actually one of my graduates, who's now a colleague of mine, Dr. LaWanda Hill, and I have Sex Positive You. So we are doing workshops around Black women's sexual health and sexual wellness. So,
and we're gonna collect all of this, and we know everybody like, can get, how do I find this number?
People want to be your friend, right. Dr. Nikki. They're like, how can I be
I'm very busy against 992. But it's all, I think, just like Rwenshaun said, he's got a lot going on. We all got a lot going on, but it feeds us, right? And I think we all, I'll speak for me. I recognize, like, I have a position of privilege as a Black woman with a PhD. And I got into the mental health field because I wanted to be able to do things to help my people as a collective and contribute to my community. So it's a lot, but it all feeds me in different ways and allows me to do my part that I feel like I'm responsible to do.
Yes, awesome. Woo. All right, Dr. Joy.
Dr. Joy stay busy too.
Right.
Yeah, so my entire platform, Therapy for Black Girls, the whole mission of the platform is to make mental health accessible and relevant. So I do that in I feel like a ton of different ways, like you mentioned, always busy. So I have a weekly podcast that I think the very cool thing. So I start a lot of this stuff without ever knowing like what the impact is going to be. But the podcast, I think, has done a couple of things. It is that first, it introduces like the general public to lots of different topics and concerns that you could talk about in therapy. I also think it helps people understand like what actually happens when the door closes in the therapist's office. And I think it helps people to realize that therapists are actual people and that we all practice very differently, so sometimes the episodes are just me, but most of the time I'm interviewing other colleagues to talk about like, how would you work with this client and how do you do this? And I think people can see like therapists' humor and how they work differently. So I think it gives people a really good exposure to like, okay, therapists could look a lot different depending on who your therapist is. So I think that has been really cool. I also have a very active Facebook community called the Thrive Tribe. So there are over 12,000 members in the Thrive Tribe, which is so cool, right? Like it allows me to like talk with and work with therapeutically like all these different women across the country and internationally, just about all kinds of topics. Like we are talking about like our favorite music and, you know, but also very therapeutic conversations about like how do you deal with a tense relationship with your mother and all of those different kinds of things. So that has been really cool. And also the therapist directory. So there are over 700 therapists in the directory now, which I think is amazing from where it started at 90 therapists. You know, so people have been very successful in finding therapists to work with them. In therapists have also reported having very full caseloads based on being in the directory. So I think that it has just been amazing to be able to do the work that I do, like Dr. Nikki. Feel like it's a real privilege, and my goal has always been to really work for Black women, and I feel like I'm making a real difference there.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, and Dr. Jess.
Yes.
I think she's doing it. Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Okay. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So currently one thing I'm trying to do is really impact the representation that people of color see in broadcast media. So because I work in media, you know, TV producers and radio hosts and journalists, they have a tendency to turn to the same group of experts over and over again, partly because they're busy. Sometimes I'm sure it's laziness. And this group is predominantly white. And because I get so many media requests and I can't field them all, I only refer them out to people of color. So if you ever need looking for that, get on this list. Because, you know, oftentimes it's not really about credentials. They go to the person that's easiest to find. I mentioned before, maybe they have a pretty shiny brand and they end up getting exposure despite, you know, in some cases, mediocre skills. And they're like working hard. So in many cases in which media experts are not white, it's often people like me, right, who get to be out there because I pass in many spaces, in most cases, right? So the term they're using right now is ethnic ambiguity.
Right.
It's a way of checking all the boxes, like, well, Dr. Jess is really great, and we've got this Chinese, Jamaican, you know, and instead of really wanting and benefiting from my unique and valuable perspective and from diverse perspectives, it's the new tokenism, ethnic ambiguity. So I'm trying to send as many experts who are people of color to these producers, to the writers, to the hosts every day, and also with more of an intersectional lens. Queer, people of color, fat people, old, young, non-academics, and so on. Because we know that people in media tend to look alike, and I have the privilege that I'm one of them. I'm in that room. So there's times where I should step aside, where I do step aside, and that's my role as I guess a straddling mixed race person who also passes in many spaces.
Right.
And it's a struggle because I don't always get many responses, but I'm just going to keep doing it. And I can see when I send 4 people for a show, and they'll come back and say, "Do you have any others?" And then, you know, I send them some more and they come back and say, "Do you have anyone more like you?" And I'm wondering, what does that mean, someone more like me? So I call it out. I call it out in the production room. I will walk into the producers' rooms and say, like, wake up. When's the last time you had a Black man on this program as an expert who wasn't talking about sports or anything?
Right.
And sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I feel exhausted by it, which of course is my privilege, because again, I'm in the room. But we're seeing like little bits of change, and I'm just going to keep doing that. And the more, you know, I can do the business side, the sustainable, the more I can push back and afford to lose some of these connections. And then once in a while, you kind of go. The other piece that we've talked a lot about mentorship. It's something that came from a very white space, from finance, but that's sponsorship. And so a few years ago, I was asked if I would sponsor someone. So the difference between being a mentor and a sponsor, as I was explained, is that as a sponsor, I'm also supposed to create financial and career opportunities, and not just help, but move them into spaces where they're earning money. And so this is something that someone else in my field, and I'm looking at doing more of, and we can all think about as well, because we know that men, for instance, are more likely to have, women and men in finance are equally likely to have a mentor, but men are 10 times as likely to have a sponsor. And I'm sure if you think that along the lines of their race and ethnicity, it's going to be in great favor for white people as well. So those are the two areas right now, media and
Wow.
sorry, not mentorship, sponsorship.
Sponsorship.
Language.
Sponsor me.
Looking for sponsors.
No, that's amazing, and that's one of the main reasons we wanted to have you on here, because you've reached out to us just saying like, hey, are y'all interested in these opportunities, because they need to have more people of color. And so, like you said, to acknowledge that privilege that you have and then try to pull people up to be where you are is amazing.
Love it.
And we all could do, that's like you said, the goal of mentorship, and then now my mindset is sponsorship to give people an opportunities to make money and things like that. So that's awesome.
I love it.
All right, so that was the main discussion. We really appreciate you guys.
My goodness.
We know this conversation could have went for hours, and so we wanted to make sure to try to keep it short. So we only have about 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A, and what we're going to do is we're going to move it to Danielle and Justin. They're going to go over the Q&A. I see we have 20 something questions on here. Y'all have to limit that to 2. And we'll try to figure out a way to keep the conversation going, and post those questions maybe even on our social media or something like that, so people can continue to talk about these different topics. So are y'all ready? I was like, yeah. All right. So they're going to be over the Q&A. And again, everybody doesn't have to answer. I don't even know if some of the questions are for specific people or what, but they've been kind of fielding that for us. So we're
going to be working on the Melanin Mental Health bus.
How
Hello, can you hear us?
A lot of feedback.
There we go. All right.
Yeah.
Can everyone hear us?
Okay. So we got a lot of great questions. So unfortunately, we can't answer all of these. So we're going to kind of hit some of the ones that kind of stood out a little bit that can be answered in the time that we have right now. So you want to go ahead?
All right. So the first one we have is from guest 885, and it says, this is to Dr. Manuel. What resources do you recommend for exploring ancestral and indigenous knowledge? I'm a Chicana and would like to be able to incorporate such knowledge into my professional life. Sure.
So what I heard was resources for indigenous knowledge, ancestral knowledge. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, those are difficult to come by in terms of going to our usual places. Some of the, I guess, the places that I would, or the people in terms of articles would be Dr. Joseph Cervantes, who does incorporate some of this in his work. Also, Lilian Cosmas Diaz, she's a Puerto Rican psychologist, therapist, but she talks a lot about incorporating indigenous knowledges and decolonizing the field. And she talks also about post-colonization stress disorder as well, which I think a lot of us connect with in terms of our clientele. The other thing is, depending on your community, maybe this could be more, if this person needs to get up to you directly, finding the indigenous circles in your community. Did the guests say where they were located?
No, they did not. But if guest 885 is out there, if you can just list out your location for them.
Because there are a couple of communities in Austin. There are several in San Antonio. In California, there are a lot. I know some communities in Denver as well, in Colorado, and even in the Northeast. So part of it is trying to find those circles and now with Facebook, sometimes you can find some of those communities through Facebook. I mean, that's kind of where I would start. It's definitely something that's not out there a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, the next question is from guest 379, and it says, why are Black males so scared to go and get the help needed for therapy?
And that's for anyone to answer, so just jump on in.
Can you repeat the question?
Repeat the question. Why are Black males so scared to go and get the help needed or go to therapy?
Well, just from a personal experience and working with individuals, we're taught to not address our emotional issues. Only emotions that we're allowed to express is anger and happiness, and we're told to suppress everything else. So if you think about therapy, therapy is about opening up yourself and being vulnerable. Men don't associate that with being manly. So I mean, it goes into the toxic masculinity. Also, it's a lot of different layers to it, and we don't know what therapy looks like. We don't have a lot of men that look like us in the actual position to provide us therapy. So we're not going to open up to women about certain things. We're not going to open up to someone, a white individual, about certain things. So there's a lot of different layers that keep us from actually addressing those issues. And then too, we just don't want to go to therapy because we don't want to open up that can of worms when it comes down to, because we don't know what it's going to look like.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to
chime in on that one? Dr. Nikki, you look like you really wanted to say something.
I mean, I don't think I have anything to add. I always think, I think that I was actually watching the David Letterman interview with Jay-Z on his new Netflix special. And he said my emotional intelligence was not just zero, it was like negative. And so I think like the whole endeavor of therapy as it is structured and as it is presented, just the thought feels overwhelming. And most men like to have a sense of agency in the things that they do, right? They want to go out and do something and do it well. And so if it feels like it is so much out of your depth that you can't approach it to have a sense of mastery or agency, I think that only adds to the level of resistance that comes along with it. I get a lot of calls from women wanting to figure out how to get their man in therapy or wanting to go to couples when really it's the man that they want the work to be done on. And so I do think we have to, I actually took a note in my phone about the locker room. I'm going to be telling everybody about that because I think that could be a really great conduit to get more folks in the door who could use it.
I want to add quickly one thing to that I think we need to address the therapist side of that too. Because when we talk about the emotional intelligence related to therapy, I think sometimes therapists push men too quickly instead of forming that relationship. And I think we need to address that in the training aspect as well.
I like that agreeance. Yes. Okay, from guest 234, some still go to the community. How can we get pastors/churches to connect with mental health and add training to the help that people seek?
Any idea? Anyone open answer?
I've actually been encouraged by like the pastors and religious leaders in the Atlanta area who are kind of willingly seeking that out for themselves in their congregation. So I think that that's already a conversation that is probably starting for a lot of spiritual groups. But I also think that we have a responsibility as therapists to do some of that outreach too, to kind of say, okay, we know that this is where people are. The pastors have the congregation's ear. And so how can we get that message to them in a way that feels like, you know, that's an open door for their congregation as well?
Sure. Definitely. So who wants to make us the last?
And I think to add to that, what Dr. Joy was saying is, like I said, it's about us being able to reach out, but then also we have to put our ego and pride aside sometimes too, and understand that if we're going into their place of worship, we have to work within their places of worship. So we have to be flexible to be able to reach these individuals as well.
All right, guest 810. Is there a way we can discuss mental health as it intersects with LGBTQIA plus identities in folks of color, particularly Black folks?
Sure. To not be as flippant. Yes, I think somebody had said before at some point about like communities of color and us being clinicians of color. And I think that's one of the areas that we need to continue to work on. Like we have our own cultural competencies that we continue to need to build, even though we might be brown folks, but I'm always critically thinking about the intersections of class, gender identity, sexual orientation. All of those really matter in terms of how we fully understand an individual, understanding what those pieces mean for me, and recognizing that all of those pieces are dynamic for me and change for me. But being willing, at least for me and how I work as a clinician, is being willing to explore those pieces and talk about where are the points of connection and where are the points of disconnection with clients. I certainly consider myself an LGBTQ plus ally and advocate. I try to make that known in how I market myself as a therapist, but I also recognize, like as a Black person, as a Black hetero cisgendered person, there are that's privilege that comes along with that I have to continue to be critical and think about and work around, and that folks of color who represent those sexual minority communities might not have had positive experiences within their own communities of color around their identity, and that we have to be a little bit more extending in our efforts and services as clinicians to make them feel welcomed and to be a safe space for them.
Dr. Just had something.
I just want to add a piece around the homophobia and transphobia that is portrayed as rampant in minority communities, and particularly in Black and Asian communities. We have to also go back and look at the colonial roots of that. So I look at the way, for instance, homophobia is portrayed in Jamaica as this Jamaican danger, right? And sometimes I've seen some media pieces that portray all Jamaicans as homophobic and transphobic, but don't acknowledge the fact that it's colonial roots. It was the British who were there and enacted those buggery laws that are still in existence. So when we look at homophobia and transphobia in being inclusive and supporting LGBT communities, we have to look at the intersectional perspective, but also look at decolonizing sexual and gender experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I have to agree with you, Dr. Jess, about that. I think the ways that we look at sexuality definitely from a colonial perspective, and if we look at a lot of our ancestral indigenous communities, we didn't have that type of homophobia. That is much more modern way of looking at it. It's also a way of looking at productivity in terms of who can reproduce children, and then they infected it into other ways of lifestyle. So if you had communities that were used primarily as labor, you wanted to make sure that they produced children so they could produce more labor. So you emphasize and you add these ideas of homophobia in a lot of different ways to keep that labor pool producing in the way that the colonizers want them to do. The other thing is, in a lot of Native traditions, there is this idea of two-spirit folk. So even though that's a more recent way of talking about that, we know that in a lot of indigenous communities, there was more fluidity in gender. We know that when people came to North America, that there were a lot of female leaders in the indigenous communities, but the Europeans assumed that the male chiefs and the male leaders were the ones that had more power, so they connected with those folks, and it just reproduced that patriarchy just in terms of gender as well. So just wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Echo. I just wanted Justin, if you want to put your 2 cents in.
Oh, yeah.
Listener.
So I am the host, but just to put my 2 cents is a clinical specialty of mine to see gay men in the queer community. And so what I've seen a lot of is it's that much harder to make it visible because not only, especially in people of color, the different stigma that's around it with what mental health looks like and being in distress, but also that a lot of times with the history of going to therapy that they think it's about conversion therapy. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times people see therapists, they're turned off completely because they're thinking like, you're trying to change me or you don't accept me. So it's, as clinicians, we have to do that much more to make it known that we are affirming and putting things on your website to let people know that what you are about and that you are affirming and that you can support them in their life and help them with stressors just like anybody else. And a little special note, at the end of the month, on Thursday, June 21st at 6 p.m., I'll be doing a presentation in collaboration with my private practice, the Queer Center at Melanin Mental Health, on the intersection of culture and sexuality, as this is Pride Month. So I'm so excited to be presenting that with them. All right. Andy? We going back to y'all? We'll throw it back to them.
You're good.
Y'all got to mute. Oh, there you go. Okay. All right. So we are about to wrap up. We want to thank everybody. There was a question that was asked that we did want to address. It's something that we've gotten asked quite a few times about the Melanin Mental Health mission and why it is specific for Black and Latinx communities. And that's something even when we first started talking about it, we discussed like how do we make sure that we are inclusive, but also understanding that as a Black woman and as a Latina, these are our experiences. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to let Elisa answer that. She did a really good job.
Well, it's just a matter of right now. This is kind of what we know. As we're opening the doors, as we're learning more, as we're changing the face of therapy, little by little, we want to be adding more and more to what it is that we can do. But right now, what we do know is our experiences, and so that's good.
Nope. Is that better? No.
There's an echo. Did y'all turn off yours?
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Okay.
That's good.
Okay. So yeah. So just still an echo.
Yeah.
Turn it off.
Oh, let me do that. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Is that better?
Oh, it's because Justin's thing was so long. Okay.
Okay. So yes, right now, this is what we know. We know our experiences. This is what we're passionate about. And as we grow and as we expand, we certainly want to be able to do that. But it's kind of like what we've been talking about is this really was something that was very personal to us when we even started this. And that was because of our own need. And I think so many times that's really what kind of sparks these movements. Mm-hmm. It's because of our own personal experiences. And so I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it just goes into you start with what you know and then you expand from there.
So you always know how to say things concisely. I go on and on.
Yeah, right. We want to be authentic in our own experiences and the things that we struggle with. And we started it because we were a Black and a Latina that were trying to figure out. We were trying to figure out where to find other people of color in the mental health field. And so that's where it started. But it has expanded. From jump, we've had Asian Americans be involved and come to events and things like that. And we make sure we give them a voice in those events, which is part of the reason why Dr. Jess is here as well. Because we want to make sure that we do continue to give voices to everyone. But right now, that's just where it is, but that's not where we're intending for it to go. So I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, so thank you to everyone.
Oh my goodness, this was so good. I'm still, I feel like y'all need to come to Houston so we can all celebrate together.
We will definitely send out emails with the replay. We'll send out all the details of what everyone has going on. Because clearly there's lots happening. We want to make sure that everyone can stay connected. And I don't know. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, stay in touch with us. Y'all can stay in touch with us. We're going to give everybody's information.
Yes.
Everybody's online. We're online. Catch us. Get in touch with us. Send us your feedback. Send us your questions. Yes,
that's it.
So good.
We are very timely people. It is 6:00, and so we want to thank everybody, and we will keep in contact and talk to you guys soon. So thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
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 That was so
as
good.
soon as I could figure out.
Just shut down the.